Hey there, I'm Kevin Sizemore.
And I'm Gunnar Sizemore.
Welcome to The Miracle Show. Today's episode, we take you down to Nashville, Tennessee, where we find out things aren't always what they seem.
And joining us all the way from Nashville is musician Andy Larkin. Hello, Andy.
Hello, Gunnar. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Now, can you tell us about first meeting Baruch and Sasha?
I used to go to the park and play my trumpet. Sometimes people would come by and listen. And one day, a man came by, sort of guiding a very elaborate, heavy wheelchair, and it was Sasha. And they stopped to listen to me playing my trumpet. And I'm an educator. I've always like, well, what do you want to hear? What are you interested in? What do you want to play? So, what kind of crazy idea is that? Someone in a wheelchair, and who would presume that someone who would seem to be so profoundly immobilized could even play a trumpet? And why was that my instinct? I didn't know why it was my instinct that this guy had music in him, but it turned out to later be very true.
Now let's go straight to Sasha's father, Baruch, in Chicago. How you doing, Baruch?
Hi, Kevin.
Hi, Baruch.
Oh, hi, Gunnar. Good to see you too.
So, Baruch, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
I was born in 1955 in Soviet Union. In 96, September 18, we came to United States with actually newborn Sasha. It happened that a couple of days after he was born, it was found that he has a very serious cardiac defect. Sasha had a surgery. And when we were released from the hospital, Sasha thank God, he was able to eat, just started to able to eat. And he was blind. He lost basically everything what he learned by 4.5 months.
However, I understand he was 12 when there was another accident?
We've been going to skiing in North Wisconsin. So we met actually people who teach us this way in Wisconsin. Fantastic instructors who work with people with disabilities, skiing, incredible. We bought Sasha's boots, and on the way back we just turning to close to our apartments. We got an accident, and from there it was really bad, and nothing happened with me, but with Sasha, and he had a C1, C2 trauma. C1, C2, it's just where our spine starts.
At this point, Sasha's now using a wheelchair. He's unable to speak and as well having limited vision. So my question is, how do you communicate with him?
I was saying, Sasha, blink when I'm saying the letter. A, B, C, D. So, and Sasha start to spell for me how he feel, so on. So yeah, life changed. I adjusted my apartment, Olga adjusted her house, and there are some specific electricity things like this, ramp, number of things which doors need to be wide enough to go with a wheelchair. So, and we've been released and we start to live at home.
Eventually things settled down and Sasha was able to return to school.
And Sasha loves school. He actually became really good with computer, really good. For Sasha, it was more like communication because he was able to write something on it, to do some homework, can listen books, radio stations.
And Sasha was still able to type?
He did with his chin. It's not like straightforward. It takes time.
Let me ask you this, how was his relationship with his peers?
They're in a hospital, in a school. Everybody really loves Sasha.
As he got older, you began involving Sasha in your sculpting.
No, I always was kind of encouraged Sasha, let's do some art project. And he had some idea. Sasha was amazed with the space. The Stephen Hawking's is his hero. We made a spaceship also. It's just hanged to the ceiling here, and we made a few good projects.
And then one day, you and Sasha were on a walk when you heard something out of the ordinary.
Sasha loved long walks, and especially on Shabbos, with the good weather, we just went for a few miles around, and we're going by Sculpture Park, Sasha in a chair. We stopped with Sasha, because Sasha, when he hears music, he just an alert right away, and was really good.
And Andy, you mentioned that Sasha had an immediate impact on you.
I mean, part of being a musician is being optimistic, of carrying a mood with you and giving it to other people. A musician tries to see everything through their art, through the lens of music, and I think you could certainly do that with Sasha. And Sasha could certainly control the mood of a room just with his smile. But he just beamed when he smiled, and and your bad mood was not going to stick for that day when you saw that smile.
Okay, so in talking to Sasha's dad, he found out you made musical instruments. And now at this point, you began brainstorming adaptive music devices that Sasha could use to make his own art.
Actually, where I taught, I started a kids woodworking program at the Art Center, and then his dad actually asked me, because he knew that I did woodworking with kids and I built musical instruments, if I could help adapt something so that Sasha could make music of his own. Sasha's father approached me about this project of helping Sasha make music, and then I thought, well, I do have a few skills. I mean, I think I can. I'll give it a try. So basically, I took the reins. I started Everybody Makes Music. I made it a real organization so that work got done.
Baruch, what made you feel confident that Andy was the right man for the job?
Andy himself incredibly musical. He can play on anything, on everything. I don't know, if I give him this glass, he probably will play on some beautiful things, I'm pretty sure.
And Andy, how do you approach this issue from Sasha's end? Since Sasha was a person with mobility issues, where did you begin on creating adaptive instruments?
So, to back up again, when you're paralyzed, basically the technician is trying to grab any type of movement at all to capture an input. So often, if you see someone in a wheelchair with a shroud or a surround, you actually have like hidden switches there. So the person, say they're, for example, driving a wheelchair, click this way if we want to move our wheelchair right, click this way for left. But there'll be a series of switches off and on there, just buttons, and but they're basically just input points. At that point, I reasoned that I had enough smart engineering and programming friends that I was confident I could re-rig some of Sasha's input devices and switches.
And this resulted in a computer system that correlated numbers to sounds? How did you come up with that?
So I live in Nashville and have where people use something called the Nashville number system to call out chord numbers. So in music, they say we're going to go C, D, E, F, G, and that's part of a C scale, the first 5 notes. In music, in sort of number system, we would say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I was learning along with Sasha for how to allow him to make music, and it was awesome education for me. And I really had to dig deep into the art of music and the fundamentals of it. Obviously, there's all the technical victories that we had together and that I had as someone, developing assistive technology, and what I had to learn about, technology in general. But there's also the deep, deep subtext of how do I interact with someone for whom I have to wait a little longer to get feedback from, and how do I pace this, and then more profoundly, how do I just be and wait? Because I think with Sasha, if you've ever had an old familiar friend, you're sitting in a room with them or driving on a long car trip, and So all of a sudden, neither of you is talking, and then it's sort of a comfortable silence, as I heard someone once say. I'm here, you're here. I'm glad we're together. I learned that from Sasha. And eventually, he's actually able to play, I think it was Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, just using his lips.
Andy was ready to investigate, experiment. He's pretty open to different things. He'll look all around internet to finding things which he can put together and it will work.
So soon after, however, Sasha's health took a sudden turn. Baruch, if it's not too difficult, could you tell us about this?
He was at mom's home and I got a call. I wasn't even at my home, I was somewhere. I got a call that Sasha is dying in a hospital. Kind of sepsis, which took Sasha for a few hours. He's gone. And we've been going to museums, so on. And then was a shock. Sasha was gone, and it was out of blue.
Baruch, there's nothing either one of us can say other than we're very sorry.
Thank you for sharing that part of the story. Andy, how did you get the news?
I remember working in my shop in February of 2019, and Loretta, his music therapist teacher, who had taken over from me because I was then in Tennessee and she was closer in Chicago, gave me the call and said, "Did you hear about Sasha?" And then I said, "No, what?" And she gave me the news, and I just couldn't believe it. I mean, we had just seen him, less than a month earlier, and seemed as vibrant as ever. And not to mention he was just so young, only 22 years old. And just heartbroken too, because he had come so far as a musician. It was just heartbreaking on every level.
Baruch, we understand a lot of people came to pay tribute at his funeral.
No, Sasha was, everybody knew Sasha and everybody loved Sasha. That's true. There have been many people from school. No, my older son with his family, of course. Some of his neighbors, some of his co-workers, many people from the synagogue where I am. And actually Andy flew from his home here to Chicago for the funerals. He just came say goodbye to Sasha.
So I was pretty broken up for a long time about Sasha's passing, and pretty angry. All the feelings you have when you lose a friend. And I wrote a few songs about it. And it took me a long time to get back on the horse to even want to help.
Andy, you managed to carry on Sasha's legacy through your incredible organization.
Sasha was the foundation for Everybody Makes Music, because prior to Sasha, I never had those types of challenges before, nor did I understand how important it was to make music accessible to everyone.
And if there are other people with disabilities out there who'd like to find a way to make music, what would you say to them?
Contact me at the everybodymakesmusic.org site, and I will gladly connect you with either somebody in your area or we can help you with your specific challenge.
And Baruch, your son, he lived an incredible life and one that's led to great progress for people with disabilities in the arts. So, my question is, if there was one lesson from Sasha's life that you'd like the viewers to take away, what would that be?
I would say the world is great. The world life is great. I still not getting how Sasha was so positive, full of love, interesting things around. I mean, in his condition, just enjoy life, do the best you can, and this is and still be thankful for what we have.
Timing is everything. It takes just one person to make a difference.
And music is the universal language. Oh, speaking of timing, let's go to Texas and meet with John and Leisa Pettyjohn and find out what they faced as they awaited the birth of their third child.
Hey, Kevin. Fan of the show? Thank you so much for having us on.
Hey there, thanks for being here. So, we understand you just moved into your new home.
Yeah, we just moved in this week and we haven't even gotten unpacked yet.
Well, thanks again for being here to share your story. So, tell us what happened when Leisa was about to give birth to your third child.
With first two children, we drove up to a birth center that's about an hour and 15 minutes away from our home, and midwives delivered them, and it was very uneventful, great births, and we were planning on having the same sort of thing with the third child.
But things were a little different that day.
I asked Leisa if she wanted to go to the birth center yet, and she wasn't feeling like she was ready yet, that we would just be getting there too early. And so we waited a little bit, and my parents, who were asked to watch our kids while we went for the birth, they had water aerobics that they were supposed to be teaching that day. And Leisa was a little bit on the fence, but she ended up deciding that she thought it wasn't imminent or anything, so they went ahead and left for water aerobics. Well, after a little bit, she started going, I'm not sure, it's feeling a little bit more imminent than I thought it was going to be. So we tried calling them, and they had left their phones in the lockers and they were in the pool, and so we just had to wait until they were done with water aerobics.
So now events are in motion over which you have no control, and the clock is ticking. Leisa, were you concerned at all?
So once we got in the car and everything, the contractions were about 5 to 10 minutes, about what they tell you to go ahead and come in. And then once we got on the highway, which was about 5 minutes from our house, they were probably down to 2 minutes. I mean, they just picked up so fast.
And one of the reasons I thought the baby wasn't going to come in the car was with the previous two births, the water had broken, and then it had been about an hour or more before the baby was born.
Okay, things are getting pretty intense as Leisha's contractions began. What in the world possessed you to start filming?
Leisa had asked me to film the birth this time, and so I brought my GoPro with me. And I thought, well, I don't think she's going to have the baby in the car, but just in case. And so I set the GoPro up on the dash, settled on setting it next to my leg, and so I just kept a hand on the steering wheel and put a finger on the GoPro and let it film there.
And so I still had no idea that he was going to be born in the car. I mean, I was like, no, there's just no way. There's no way that could happen.
But it did happen.
She had her water break, and then one contraction later, I believe, the baby started coming out. So it was not an hour later.
I was just in shock, really. That was pretty much it, literal shock. I just could not believe it. Okay, the baby's coming, so I just got to do what I've got to do. He can't stay in if he's halfway out, so we gotta just push him all the way. And so I just tried to hold him, and then I eventually wrapped him up in my shirt to keep him warm and everything until we got there. And
look at that.
One of the truly amazing things about that footage, aside from the birth itself, is just how cool, calm, and collected you were, Jonathan. I mean, you were cool the entire situation.
I wanted Leisa to be able to be calm too, because it was, a frightening sort of situation, and me panicking would make things worse for everybody, especially since I was in charge of driving the car and keeping us safe.
And Leisa, I mean, kudos to you for delivering your own baby without any help.
since we had 2 other babies before, it was a little bit easier to understand what was happening.
Crazy. That's absolutely crazy. So what happened when you got to the birth center?
When we first got to the birth center, Jonathan ran in and he told the midwives that we had the baby, and she just replied, "Oh, okay." And so she came out and checked on us, and then she told us where we could pull around and that they would be able to get a wheelchair.
Jonathan, I gotta say, man, it sounds like you got an amazing partner there.
Leisa is the best wife that any man could ask for, and she is an amazing mom. She's a very hard-working mom with 6 kids to take care of. She just, we wouldn't have 6 kids if it weren't for Leisa and her work ethic. And, she's just amazing and a great, great woman.
So this is what everyone wants to know. How's your son doing?
Despite Josiah being born in a car, he's perfectly healthy. We had no complications at all. And, he's a happy little boy.
Well, I mean, I have to ask, did that experience change the way you approach the birth of your other 3 children?
We decided to just have home births after that. I pretty much was like, no car for the last month of, no, not really, but we decided that was just the better option, to just stay home and let them come to us. And that way, if something like that ever happened again, we would at least be home and have things around that, could help us better care until the midwife was able to get there. But they've been able to get there just fine. So it's been very uneventful, thankfully.
And uneventful is probably a good thing after that experience.
Yep. Hey, Jonathan and Alicia, thank you so much for being with us, and we wish you nothing but the best to your entire family.
Thanks, Kevin.
Around the world, people ring bells to signify a victory against the disease of cancer.
And these bells become doubly important when a child is the victor. To share a truly remarkable story of perseverance, we welcome Steve and Lena Odell.
Hey Kevin, it's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. We're Bella's parents.
And we are very happy to be on your show.
It's nice to meet you as well. Can you tell us about your youngest daughter, Bella?
So Bella came into our lives on February 23rd, 2013.
Yeah, she was very quiet, softy, elegant little girl. Very, very, like a butterfly, really softy girl.
And she lived 5 years without any sicknesses, any visits to the doctor, or any of those sorts of things.
And I understand things took a turn. Can you tell us what happened?
Bella had turned 5 years old when we noticed that she was starting to behave differently or have different physical ailments that started with a rash and pain in the thighs. We thought maybe a meningitis was a possibility. Some sort of infectious disease is what was sort of being investigated. And she saw her mommy moving some rice around and wanted to help her one morning, and went over to the closet, and she picked up this 25-pound bag of rice and then screeched in pain. And then she had this back pain, this unrelenting back pain that was really unusual for a 5-year-old to have.
She was in constant pain, nonstop. Like I couldn't let her put her in bed. She would scream. If I were to take her out of the bed, she would scream. So I was like really confused and scared.
And at that point, we were now working with Johns Hopkins Hospital and had a couple of inpatient sessions and with their infectious disease doctors. And they had pulled blood one of the times, approaching June, that they drew some blood. And then on our way home, they called us to immediately come back because her hemoglobin was, I think it was like 4.7 at that point.
And a normal range would have been 10 or 12, which means with a 4.7, those numbers indicated she had severe anemia.
Did they find what was causing it?
When they came to tell us the news, Steve was on his way to the hospital, and he called me just a second before the doctors get to the room, and he said, "Did they come in yet?" I said, "No, not yet." He said, "So whenever they come in, just put me on speaker so I can listen to what they're saying." The time they knocked on the door and they came in, and then they start talking. And I put him on the speaker, so he said, "Well, the result came back." So I was like, "Okay, what is it?" And he said, "Well, we found cancer." And I would start shaking, like, "Don't say that." I freaked out. I didn't know what to do. It was not real that day. It was surreal, like your worst nightmare that you just hear that word. I wasn't even prepared. I was with all of her sicknesses and mystery diagnoses every time they come up with. I was still positive. Never thought of cancer at all.
And the fever persisted for 2 months. It never went away. It was there every single day. To give you a visual, the reason the pain, the back pain was so prevalent, this particular type of cancer, neuroblastoma, grows off the adrenal glands typically, and it had been pressing against their spine. And based on the measurements, you were looking at one that's the size of my fist. So when I did the measurements of my fist based on what they provided, that's what was in her back. You couldn't see it, but,
Yeah.
and she weighed 27 pounds. So the size of my fist inside of her pressing is where the pain was coming from.
At this point, had the cancer spread anywhere else?
At that point, it was all over her body. It was off her. There's a particular artery that runs to the liver, right there as well, and it was just sort of growing all around that. So there was that one, and then she had it in her lymph nodes, and then of course the reason for the anemia, severe anemia, was it was also in her bone marrow at that point. So she had it in 3 separate systems. Yeah, so there's no time lapse, there's no going home. At that point, it was immediate, high dose, multi-session chemo. The plan is extremely aggressive for this type of tumor cancer, so it's a lot of sessions. In pediatric cancer, they treat at much higher doses. One, because children recover at a much higher rate. So, you know, on the one hand, it's good because you have a higher chance, hopefully, of getting rid of what you have. But on the other, it's crazy. You know, you're poisoning your child at a level that is just really quite insane when you do the comparisons to what they give adults.
How long did she have to go through chemo?
The treatments went on for approximately just over a year, so to shrink the tumor to a size that is more reasonable to operate on. So after 40 or so sessions, she went into, she had surgery. That surgery was, I believe, on the table, was it 12 hours?
13.
13 hours.
It's because the doctor at the beginning told us the procedure will be from 6 to 8 hours, the surgery, and then it kept extending from 6 to 8 to 9, 10, 11, 13, so we were just drained. We were the last family sitting in the waiting area.
And then he came out and he's like, it went great, you know.
And was that the end of it?
So it went from the surgery, 7 days in the hospital, she got 3 days at home, and then she went to the bone marrow transplant. And then from there, she turned the corner and was able to, I mean, she pulled out of it, and she got out of the hospital
December
the day
24th.
before Christmas.
Christmas
Yeah,
Eve.
Christmas Eve.
After spending 1 month at the hospital.
And from there, she received, I think,
Radiation.
1 week. She had a 1 week break, and then jumped into 20 sessions of radiation, 4 weeks, 5 days a week, every single day, of course, radiation. I think that might have been the first time they considered her cancer-free.
Now, as difficult as this was for her parents, Bella was the one who had to fight this disease and its ruthless treatments.
Now here to talk about this devastating battle is Bella Odell with her sister, Helen. Hey, Helen. Hey, Bella. How you two doing?
Hi, Kevin. I'm Bella. Thanks for having me.
No, it's our pleasure to have you, Bella. And you too, Helen.
Helen, were you still living at home when Bella began getting sick?
Yes, I had just graduated college. We would have dinner dates, me and her. She loves going to Nando's and Chick-fil-A and taking her to do all these other activities that a 5-year-old would enjoy. And then just things I feel like took a very wrong turn. And I remember, like, even my graduation, she was just in so much pain. So
Bella, it must have been really tough for you.
I really didn't like it because I hate needles. And I also hate surgeries because I can't even eat or drink.
Did you miss things like going to school?
Honestly, I really didn't like school, so the answer is no. But I did miss going to my friends.
Bella, do you remember what it was like going through chemo?
Me suffering for like 100 days.
Do you remember how it was, how it felt when the doctors were trying to see what was wrong with you and we kept going to the hospital?
I was confused.
You were confused?
And at the same time in pain.
What was the scariest part of being in the hospital?
Chemo. Also, what's scary was my surgeries.
So, Steve and Lena, eventually, after a grueling process, Bella got through a treatment, and that must have been an unimaginable joy. To celebrate, Bella participated in a special ceremony. Can you tell us about that?
They get together and they read a sort of end of cancer, under treatment statement, and they ring the bell with everybody there celebrating.
It's true to clearly say my treatment is done. This course is run. Now I am on my way.
Because it's as you've heard, it's harrowing.
That was the day I was waiting for, actually, for the whole year and a half. And I couldn't stop myself from crying. I was trying to hold my tears, but I couldn't. It was a very joyful day.
Happy end of chemo, dear Bella. Happy end of chemo to you.
Helen and Bella, what was that day like for you?
Overwhelmed with joy. It was a great day.
It was the greatest day for life.
Yes, it was.
It reminds you, it definitely makes things real. Both ringing the bell and realizing what that's all about and why it matters.
I felt like I was finally going to be set free. It's like if I'm a bird and I'm finally being set free from my cage.
Bella, what would you say to other kids who may be going through cancer treatments?
If you have stage 4 cancer, just be brave and focus your mind on strength.
And then you're a miracle. You're a miracle, baby. You beat cancer.
I love you, baby girl. I love you too, Helen. I also love my family.
I loved when Bella said, just be brave and focus your mind on strength. It really goes to show that mindset is everything.
Yeah, and speaking of mindset, faith plays a huge role in your life.
It can make a difference when applied to everyday trials.
This story is about Ramin Parsa. He was born a Shiite Muslim in Iran. Ramin converted to Christianity in his teens and eventually migrated to America, where he became a pastor. His faith came from religion.
On a mission trip to Mexico, Ramin's faith was severely tested. Joining us now from California is Pastor Ramin Parsa. Hi, Ramin.
Hey, Gunnar. Thank you. It was nice meeting you, and I'm a big fan of the show.
So, hey, let's get right into it. Your life has been defined by faith, beginning with your upbringing as a Muslim.
Since I was born and raised in a Muslim family and a predominantly Islamic country, I became familiar with Islamic laws, Islamic rituals, with Islamic teachings, and I was, to the best of my ability, trying to obey and follow the Islamic laws. But that only left me with a dilemma, because it caused me to question, then, who is this God that created me and created this world? And that led me eventually to hear the gospel. And when I heard the gospel, I opened my heart and asked Jesus to come into my heart. And that really changed my life. And I said everybody should know about this.
So you copied the 4 Gospels of the Bible. You put them on CDs, began distributing them, which in a strict fundamentalist Muslim country, put your life in danger.
I got stabbed. Somebody attacked me with a knife and stabbed me. And that basically began my journey to leave the country. After that, I came to America as a refugee in 2008. I just was so happy to be in a free country where I can exercise my faith freely.
Yeah, and on July 31st, 2018, you said you're on a mission trip in Mexico when something unbelievable happened?
I was still filming when the plane was taking off, and so the land disappeared. It was shaking, moving a lot, and suddenly I began to see the land again. I began to see the trees, and suddenly we felt the impact. We just hit the ground, and it was a big, like a bang, like a big noise, and the plane was just bouncing like a ball, like up and down. Because when the plane crashed, the impact was so strong that my phone actually dropped from my hand. Then we saw fires coming out of engines, and people began to scream at that moment, like they start, and I called on the name of Jesus when this happened. I say, in Jesus' name. In Jesus' name. And I said it both in English and Spanish. I said, en el nombre de Jesús. And I don't speak Spanish, but it just came out of me. Fire, smoke, and a scream. Everybody was trying to get out at the same time. So they were like, jumping on each other and stepping on each other, and there was no oxygen in the plane anymore, because I think the fire and the smoke sucked out the oxygen. I began to kick the window, try to break the window so we could breathe, but it wouldn't even crack. And also it was fire outside too. So
How did you get out?
I just followed the path because it seemed that people were moving forward. But in that moment, because everything was dark and people were screaming, and the flight attendants, we couldn't even hear them, and people were suffocating. And that's when I said, Lord Jesus, and I felt the breeze came and hit my face, and God miraculously saved me and saved all of us. And I grabbed the phone and I walked out, and I saw a lady dragging an old man who was unconscious. So I helped the woman. We put the guy out of the emergency door, jumped off the wing, and we walked away from the plane. So that's how I got off the plane. It was on the wing. There was no ramp. There was no raft. It was just jumping off the wing. Because we had infants in that plane, we had elderly people in that plane, we had all kinds of people, women, children, and just the smoke and fire and the impact, and nobody dying, it was a miracle.
And now you could see where you crashed.
We were in the jungle. We were away from the airport. We didn't see, nobody knew where crashed, actually. I was trying to get back on the plane to see if there's anybody there to save. The flight attendant was screaming for us to get away from the plane because the plane could explode at any time. We just moved toward the tail of the plane, and we saw a flight attendant on a hill, like far away from the plane, screaming and crying, please, in Spanish, por favor, get away from the plane. I saw a lady whose face was burned, half of her face was burned.
Oh my God.
Some people were like frightened, crying and weeping and shaking.
What the just happened?
And I prayed for them, and I was comforting them. And in fact, when we got off the plane and I found this group of people, passengers who were frightened, and I was comforting them, and we formed a circle, and hugging each other because it was cold, because the rain was coming, and formed a circle, and we were hugging each other, holding each other, close to each other. If it wasn't for the rain, the fire could set the whole place on fire, the whole forest. There were no enough ambulances, so they put us in the police cars, in the SUVs, in the Chevys, like in different type of cars, and rushed us to the hospital.
And having survived something as harrowing as that and having such a close call, did it change your outlook on life at all?
Sometimes we get so busy with life that life becomes just a competition for more things, more gain, and becomes so materialistic. And an experience like that actually it's an awakening. In that moment, the only question I had, did I finish what God called me to do? Meaning that, am I ready to die? Did I do what God called me to do?
Ramin, we appreciate your time. Thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Wow, what a story to end today's episode on.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. I'm Gunnar Sizemore.
And I'm his co-host, Kevin Sizemore. Thanks for watching The Miracle Show.